We live in a world where headlines are written to grab attention rather than to clarify. Spin, selective framing, and deliberate distraction often cloud the truth, leaving people polarised, misinformed, or simply exhausted by the noise.
Fact and Friction was born out of the need to slow down, strip away the theatre of contemporary media, and examine what's really going on when narratives clash.
Every episode will dive into the points of tension, the friction, where fact meets spin, where evidence collides with ideology, and where competing truths are put to the test.
Our purpose isn't to lecture or to preach. Often it won't even get to the ground truth, but to unpick, challenge, and illuminate.
So we aim to help you, our listener, to see through the haze of modern media, offering you clarity without oversimplification, and provide a balanced perspective that offers every side of the argument. So let's get to the episode. Sean, welcome back to Fact and Friction, episode 5. I want to talk today about this idea that outrage is actually a business model. I think most of us recognise that the stuff that we read, the stuff that we see, is full of, in quotes, outrage. And we'll talk about what we mean by outrage in just a minute. And that we might start to think actually that's a reflection of the world becoming more and more extreme, more polarised, more aggressive. But what if outrage is not just a social phenomenon? What if it's also a business model? Now, if anger keeps people engaged in terms of information systems, which is what we talk about here in this podcast, if it keeps people clicking, commenting, sharing, scrolling, then emotional reaction is incredibly profitable. So what I want to talk about in this episode, Sean, is how we can look at how outrage may just have become one of the most valuable currencies on the internet in the information systems we're using. Let's focus on that.
Yeah, and hello, Harry. It's good to be back. This is going to be a really important one for me because I think I'm one of the key products, because I seem to spend most of my life, according to my family, outraged. So they're obviously going to make some money out of me. And, let's look at some examples here. Just look at one example. And as we've always said, let's keep it non-political. But as you know, I'm an avid rugby fan.
Yep.
And I spend a lot of my time working out who's being transferred to who and what's been going on. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, there's a lot of what I would call clickbait stuff out there that starts taking you down certain lines in terms of, transfers. So there's a big debate going on right now about whether non-England based players should be allowed to play for England.
Yep.
There's another debate about whether South Africa should be part of European rugby, which straight away, I can feel myself being outraged already. Mm-hmm. The relationship between the Prem, as it's now called, and the RFU, and the more you read, the more you can see it's happening to you. Some of the outlets are without being rude, garbage. But I spend half of my time shouting at my phone.
Which is definitely a form of outrage. I think we've all seen it. Now, I think we're talking here, Sean, then, that some of those headlines you saw were clickbait. They were rage bait, to use the enraged word again. They were forcing you into a reaction, yep, which drove you down into that rabbit hole probably. And some of the headlines you saw beyond the first one probably were slightly more animated and emotional than the first. And it drives you down. I think we've also seen, in another vein, again, staying away from the political stuff, but how many times do we read about in social media a view is taken about something or somebody, and then people will just pile in on them, yeah, and they just pile in everywhere.
Yeah.
And we'll come back to that point later, but for me, these are all symptoms of this enragement that I'm talking about in this podcast, this sense of energy and emotion that comes through, yeah, loud and clear all the way through.
And I defy anybody to say they haven't been through that unless they're the most calm person on the planet. I mean, I think we've all had that moment where just one angry headline will change the emotional tone of the next hour. I know I've had it because my family tell me, and they get sent to the garden sometimes. So, I mean, I quite like being enraged, but that's another thing. But actually, it's when you don't even notice it's happening, and I sense that in myself, actually.
Yeah. Now, I'm told by the things that I've read that if you have an outrage, a high emotional thing to look at. It captures the human attention more quickly than the sort of calm environment. And I suppose when you think about it, and I think we discussed this on an earlier podcast, humans are built through evolution to recognize threat and to see the negative perhaps more quickly than the positive, because it's in there negative that the threat probably exists. So if the human brain is naturally drawn towards conflict, threat, emotional intensity, then, as we've discussed in earlier podcasts, these algorithms that are sitting in the information systems are tracking our online behaviors. The A/B testing we talked about before, the rabbit holing, this is all about the information systems learning something very, very early on. Angry people don't log off. You might get sent to the garden, but I imagine you take your telephone with you to shout at it down the garden. Calm news rarely goes viral. It's the aggressive, emotional stuff that you tend to find in the viral state.
No one talks about anything that is just non-controversial, do they?
Yeah.
But what I'm really interested in, and I know we're going to get to this in the rest of the podcast, is, how is it an economic resource? How does that get trained from our anger into, monetary gain?
Yeah, so I think this is where we probably lean back a bit into what we've discussed before. In practice, I think this means that the platform earns more money, advertising, etc., the longer users remain emotionally engaged. The content that creates the strongest reaction tends to get people to stay. They stay active for longer, which increases the advertising exposure and therefore the interaction rates. That's how we see money, the economy of emotion coming through, I think, in this economy of attention.
There's a really interesting aside there, actually, because all the adverts that come up make me angry as well. So you can't win, really. But it doesn't stop me from continuing with what I'm looking at.
And despite being angry, I'll wager that you've probably bought the odd thing, despite the fact that I can't believe I'm going to buy that thing I didn't realise I didn't need.
We've spoken about this before, and my latest thing, by the way, is garage paint to actually recoat my garage, but that's for another day. So let's. This is really interesting because it focuses back to some of the earlier stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And if you remember all the way back to episode 1, was that the system is designed specifically to stop you leaving.
Solely to stop you leaving. That's all it's there to do.
Exactly that. And it doesn't want to inform. It doesn't really care that whether you've got the right attitude on, whether overseas England players should be playing for England or not.
Yeah.
It just wants you to have an emotion about it,
right,
whichever way that is, because it keeps you going.
So it doesn't care whether you're informed or furious, only that you stay.
Absolutely.
And I think probably just summarise that, if attention is to be monetized, and hell yes it is, then emotion it appears to be an accelerator. If human beings are predisposed to following more emotion than less, then the emotion that the AI creates in terms of some of that media it creates, we talked about in the last episode, if it's got more emotional content, more controversial content, it's more likely to get more engagement.
Indeed. And it's worth looking at about, why does that outrage performance work
let's talk about that, because if we've posited in front of the audience that outrage is part of an economic model, why does outrage work? And I've kind of touched on it a little bit before, but I think psychologically, psychologically, anger is an activating emotion. Unlike sadness or boredom, it encourages people to do something, to react immediately, to share content with others, perhaps it's about reinforcing my group identity. I identify with this group. I've just seen a headline that reinforces that view. I am emotionally activated, therefore I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to tell other people about my worldview. And that makes outrage highly efficient for engagement systems. It creates not only an opportunity to share my view of something, it also drives, if you like, almost like tribal signaling. This is me.
Yes.
And the one thing I'd add to that, if I may, is, and I'm guilty of this as much as anybody, sometimes when I'm trying to grapple with a topic that I know is controversial, I see a headline that seems to, in 3 or 4 words, give clarity to, yes, that's what's going on. That's who's responsible. That's why this is happening. Even if that's not true, in that moment, I've sensed an opportunity for clarity, for certainty. And I think that is another aspect of this in terms of why it works so well. It's not only that it drives a reaction from me, it's that it sometimes just gives me a belief I've got a clear view of something, which might well be false, but I believe I've got clarity for the first time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And certainly the research that we've done on the psychology, because there's quite a lot of stuff out there, actually. I like the clarity word, by the way. I think it's really good, even if it's fake clarity or
misunderstood.
Indeed.
Yeah,
so I think for me, there's two real issues. One of the reasons the outrage works so well is because it gives you that sense of emotional participation.
Yeah.
We are naturally sociable creatures.
Yep.
And so sharing anger online or even in your front room can feel like you're taking action, even when really all we're doing is feeding the engagement cycle. But it does, if you think that other people are thinking the same way, I think that absolutely reinforces it. And this part of the social element to it, isn't it? That outrage also signals identity, a sense of belonging, if you like.
Yeah.
People often share emotional content, not just because they believe it, because it shows other people what side they're on. Now, that's an interesting one itself, because you tend to do that with people that are like-minded, and therefore you reinforce that perspective, and then you can both be angry together, effectively.
Yeah. I think you probably nailed it earlier on, though, when you sit in your front room and you're shouting at your telephone about what the Premiership rugby people are doing with decisions they're making, you're sharing it with the people in the room who may or may not actually share that view, but sometimes just gives you that sense that you're actively involved. I quite like that idea that you feel a sense of activation and involvement with a topic that is, well, whether it's important to you or not, you are activated by it, you're energized by it. But from the platform's perspective, I think what we're saying here is outrage is a highly efficient behavioral fuel. It's driving that emotional activation, which means I'm going to click more, I'm going to comment more, I'm going to share more. One of the things, by the way, we haven't spoken about is how frequently people actually share stuff but haven't actually read the full story behind. There's a huge majority of people that will actually just share a thing they found on a platform with other people, having only read the headline.
That's a really good point, actually. I'm sure we're all guilty of it, but I've had to stop myself several times sharing something, but see, I told you, and then reading and I tend to do it on articles, mainly on online newspapers, as opposed to some of the, the really basic
social media stuff.
But actually, the headline and some of the more reputable newspapers are bad at this. You see the headline, straight away go, that is outrageous. And then when you read the actual article, you go, oh, that's not really what it's saying at all.
Yeah, right.
But it's to try and get people hooked.
Exactly. As we said on an earlier podcast, that has been tuned. That has been refined, experimented, the A/B testing, to the point where that platform knows that version of words in that headline is the one that drives people to be more engaged, to share more, and to stay on the platform for longer. I think the important thing, though, is that the recommendation systems don't need to understand morality or truth. They just don't care. They simply learn which emotional patterns of words, patterns of posts produce the strongest measurable engagement, and then just simply amplify them, and they do it automatically. So outrage is no longer just an emotion, it's an economic resource. And I think for me that pretty much is the centre of what we're trying to say here. The economic resource of being outraged, being activated, is what's driving a lot of what we're seeing in the world. We'll come back to that point later.
So really what we're saying is that outrage, it's not just an emotion anymore, it's an economic resource. And one thing, you said that amplified automatically, but people behind those algorithms are clearly writing those algorithms and learning from the A/B testing that doing this, doing that, inciting this, bit of a strong word perhaps, is making them money, and that is absolutely the focus.
Right. So we're being exposed to well-crafted and tested content that is driving a response, which is an emotional response, we're saying. That's driving a reinforcement loop, because the system notices that we're more engaged when it gives that higher level of emotion, which is driving more revenue, which is a feedback loop that, of course, is going round and around and around. So every click, every pause, every share, every comment becomes that behavioral training data that optimizes the loops, ensures the emotion is reinforced. And I think that's probably one thing that we have spoken of now a couple of times in the podcast so far, is this optimization loop, both in terms of what it says, how it refines it, A/B testing, and then how it takes you down the rabbit hole with ever more activating, ever more emotional content. is all about driving shareholder value. It's
Indeed.
about getting that revenue.
Indeed. And the whole emotional reinforcement thing really matters, because the system's effectively, and I think you said it actually, is constantly training itself on your behaviour.
Yeah.
You're the training model.
Right.
So you're actually reinforcing yourself whilst actually optimizing the model itself. So every pause, as you said, every pause, click, angry comment,
So when you think about that,
teaches it.
exactly. But when you think about that at the population level, that's when you get this sense of mass-produced content, perhaps AI-produced content, that is full of emotional triggers, that's been tested against the population of viewers of that content who are now sharing it. It's going, quote, viral. You can begin to see now how, because it is driving an engagement model around emotional content, we start to see a view of the world that is influenced by the amount of information that has that emotional content in it. Do you see that connection?
Yeah, I think it's the scale thing, I think, is an important point, because it's easy to, when you're sat on your sofa or wherever and thinking, yeah, okay, I know I'm being manipulated, but actually I'm one person, what does it matter?
Yeah.
But we're talking literally millions and even more than that, and from whatever society, whatever continent, it is just learning. And this is where, again, the language may not necessarily matter. It doesn't matter what you think. The fact is, it's learning and feeding off the emotions, because it's about how long. And
I had a really good example quoted to me recently, which I need to dig into to find out just how true this is. Maybe I've been influenced in itself, about the fact that on the streets of London, quote, everybody is having their telephones snatched out their hands by rogue gangs going around on electric bikes, etc. You've doubtless heard that story.
Yep.
For the viewers overseas, this has been quite a big story in London. Yeah. People having their telephones ripped out their hands by rogues riding past on small motorbikes. Now, the actual number of telephones that are stolen on an average day around the weekend, for example, is something over 200 people have their telephones stolen, which sounds unbelievably a large number. Apparently, though, on an average day in London around the weekend, there are something between 20 and 40 million pedestrian journeys.
Yeah.
Which means there is a tiny fraction. Now, to be fair, it is nonetheless a very emotional thing to have your telephone taken from you, let's be clear. But how many times have you heard about the tenfold number extra people on an average day in London who trip over cracks in the pavement?
It's not news.
I've never heard it.
Indeed.
I've never heard it.
It happens a lot, and I know some of the pavements there are pretty bad now
right.
as well.
Now, the point I'm making here is the emotional content of watching a video or reading an article that's about people having their telephones ripped away from them, and God knows all of us have an umbilical cord to our black mirror, the telephone device. Snap that and the world will stop turning. But very few of us actually are aware that the number of people on an average day who trip over cracks in the pavement in London is magnitudes higher, and that end up in medical care because of it. We don't hear about any of that. Now, it's no less damaging to the individual, but it's nowhere near as emotional at the individual or the population level. And I think that's probably the point, is that you could start to believe that the streets of London are riddled with thousands of people stealing telephones, when in fact there is a problem. But by the way, it's nowhere near as big as another problem or other problems that we're not even hearing about. But as a result, our view of London is bad, worse than it needs to be. And I wonder how many millions of pounds sterling have been spent on lanyards attaching our telephones to our bodies because of a view that if I walk down the street with a telephone in my hand, it is going to get stolen.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. There's almost diversion here, though, that's the other way, that might maybe for another episode, but there was a little spike in reporting about people fare dodging on TfL.
Yeah.
And it had a little spike that's gone away. I would say that when I'm in London, which is reasonably often, I will see probably at least half a dozen people every time doing it. It's a completely different story for a different day, but what I'm saying is that it depends on what hits the imagination. people don't really care too much about people fare dodging, to be honest.
Yeah.
But they really care if their phone gets stolen.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think that's the point I'm trying to make.
And that's the thing, isn't it? If the algorithm notices that we all react more to the telephone story than the fare dodging story, guess which one's going to get promoted?
Indeed, that's the point.
And they're not being equally covered. Yeah. All right, Sean, let's now start turning our minds to, so what do we do about it? What do we learn from this recognition that we might be all being enraged to ensure that we engage for longer? So let me go back to where I started, and we've said it in the last few minutes as well. People are angry, we think, because the world is getting worse. That's the sort of the hypothesis of the world around us. The underlying reality, however, might be that we're being emotionally activated by content, and that content, because it is activating us and making us engage more, is being amplified more disproportionately. And that performs very, very well commercially, I'm sure. So it's not necessarily because the platforms want people to be angry per se. They're not actually trying to make us all miserable people. They just want us to engage. And the models know that by elevating the emotionally charged material, it produces a measurable behavioural result. More clicks, more shares, more attention, and therefore more revenue.
I think there's several answers to that. And I think one of them, which is really the core of why we're doing this, is to educate people on this is what's happening to you. And it's not from Big Brother perspective, it's just from people making money. So at least, even if you recognise that to start with, is a start point.
Yeah, I agree.
Whether you care or not.
Yeah.
But I think, and this is where, for listeners that have been into our previous existence with the World of Intelligence podcasts, and possibly for the first time in this series, I'm going to mention the tradecraft word. Because really it's about taking the time to actually open an article instead of just reading the headline and getting crossed. And really absorbing what it's trying to say. And if it's the right sort of article, might get a balanced view. But even if not, at least you're better informed, getting beneath the headline and making a judgment, a proper judgment.
Yeah, so let's just step back a second. And we'll go back to that point in just a moment. What are the symptoms that you are being put into, let's call it an outrage loop? What are those things? Now, for me, I find a lot of the material I read online, if I allow it to become so, I find it exhausting. You become almost beleaguered. And I've met people who are saying things like, I won't read the news anymore. I won't look at social media anymore because I'm just becoming so worried about the world. That's a really good symptom for me.
And it's happening more and more.
Right. So if more and more people are disengaging, that's probably a point we need to come back to another future podcast, by the way. If people are disengaging because they're so exhausted, I think that's a symptom that we are being, I'm going to use the word victimized. I don't really mean victimized. We are being influenced to believe the world is the way it is because that generates more engagement at the population level.
Yeah, and I'd say there's another element to it as well. Is and I know it's happened to me. When you're X amount of minutes or even, God forbid, hours into it, you forget why on earth you originally started reading into whichever story it is you're now so activated by. You're effectively just not seeing the world as it is. You're seeing the version that you've driven yourself almost to be holding your attention and that you feel strongly about. So I think there is definitely an element to how long have I been doing this? And by the way,
how did I get
what
here?
I really wanted to do was look at how to reconstruct a 1982 tractor, for example. How to get that in there. Instead of now I'm looking at what on earth's the RFU doing with the bad example. But
so just to pick up those points again, if you're feeling emotionally exhausted, really worried about the things you're reading, or the headlines that you keep seeing are getting more and more dramatic over a period of time, stand back and notice that and recognize that it might just be you are being emotionally activated, quotes, enraged, and you're feeling increasingly activated without really understanding the issue. Or, as you just said, Sean, why am I even reading this stuff? Because it might not actually be anything that you need to be worried about or even true. Indeed. So you're not seeing the world as it is, but to be honest, you're seeing a version that's most likely to hold your attention.
Yeah, indeed.
And by holding my attention, I'm putting some cash in somebody else's pocket.
Okay, so back to, as I just mentioned, actually getting ahead of myself a little bit. So how do we regain control?
Yeah.
And the first thing is awareness. And the second thing is is just take a moment.
Yeah.
Take a knee,
take a
as
knee.
As my US colleagues used to say.
Yeah,
but,
take a knee.
But just pause before doing anything, basically.
Yeah, maybe not do that on the high street. It's walking down Oxford Street.
That's a good point.
You might
Yes.
get trampled on.
That's a good point.
But the point is true, right? Open the article instead of reacting to the headline. We talked about headline posting and sharing is one of those things that we're very, very, very frequently doing. I think one of the things that I would suggest, and this is actually leaning on your tradecraft word from earlier, is go and look at different sources on the same story. Put in the search engine for your platform a story that you've read somewhere, go to a different platform, put the same search in, and let it bring the story on that topic, whatever it might be, and compare them. It doesn't take long. Just scan through the first few paragraphs, and you may well spot one of two things. Either the stories are very different,
yes,
or equally likely, they use dramatically different emotional language. And that, to me, reveals that they're being framed differently. The algorithm, the information system behind one platform or the other is shaping perception through the language it's using, because in that model's experience, that's what drove the greatest amount of engagement. And if you can spot the fact that the stories are different or the language being used to describe them are different, that is a clue to you that there is an emotional tag being added to this story that might be driving your reaction to it.
Yeah, and I think that the point about the emotional language is quite an important one, because if you're reading just an article that gives a balanced view, it's fine. But as soon as that emotion starts coming in, like opinionated, so this is outrageous, then you become outraged.
Yeah, yeah.
We've all read stuff. We go, oh, that seems a bit strong.
Yeah.
But then carry on doing it, and by the end of it, yeah.
But if you just did that and recognised that it was a bit strong and didn't share it, didn't click on it, didn't spend too much more time on it, it wouldn't be reinforcing the engine to do more of it. And I think that's really the point that we should be driving. So we've talked about pausing before reacting. We talked about actually opening the article itself to read whether the article actually relates to the way the headline's been posed. And then we talked thirdly about comparing across different platforms. Now, the last one's going to feel a little bit time consuming, but by the way, if it's on a topic that is generating in you a great deal of emotion that might drive you into, to go back 25 minutes, the next hour of my life is going to be miserable because I'm going to be so wound up by it, then maybe that extra minute is worth taking. So a couple of other practical ideas.
One thing I think really important actually is just to deliberately break your behavioural pattern. Just take a pause.
Yeah, just pause. The algorithm will notice. It might well throw at you a different story, or maybe a different version of a story. It's going to try and find how it re-engages you, because that's what it's been trained to do. But there are other things like disable. If you're looking at videos, I've noticed with YouTube, it will autoplay the next video.
Yes, it does.
Unless you switch it off. Disable that autoplay, because that will get you on that carousel of one video after the next, and suddenly you're into the depths of God knows what.
Yeah, indeed. And sorry, just back to what you said as well, is that, and it is time consuming, and you don't necessarily think about it, but just search for something completely unrelated. Sort of try and break the cycle.
Yeah.
Really hard thing to do.
Yeah. Because
we're naturally lazy. We're probably lying on the sofa or whatever.
Yeah.
Just avoid clicking anything that's emotionally charged. Look at something else, or actively engage with something that's much more calmer or more diverse. Show me some cats doing silly things. I don't know.
Get a quick dopamine
just
shot.
Breaking it. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I'm talking to people I know quite well, asking the question, how many times when they're on a given platform, social media or news, do they go to the search bar and insert a search they want to know about? Very, very rarely is the answer.
I'd suggest, yeah.
Try it. Go into your platform, and rather than just reading whatever it's decided to put in front of you, which, by the way, we know has been tested on many people before you got to see it, and is therefore likely to be charged with some sort of emotion to try and attract your attention, go and just put a search in. Maybe put some random searches. We talked about doing that before. And those random searches will begin to reset the way the algorithm is working. Maybe even reset your feeds.
Yeah.
Get those feeds scrubbed down. And the platforms themselves will react. Now, you can do that a number of different ways. We can talk about that in show notes perhaps. But I think what's really important here is start to regain some control. Take a moment, pause, throw some friction into the system to slow it down, and recognize that language quotient that we've talked about, that emotional language piece.
And you can distill the whole thing with, the key concept that we're coming up with is that algorithms learn from behaviour, so change your behaviour.
Yeah, right.
Easier said than done, but it's quite a neat little...
Maybe enjoy the fact that you can start to throw a spanner, a wrench into the algorithm. Start playing with it. Push it around. Tell it that you want to talk about see cat videos, and then tractors, because I'm very big into tractors. Get that control back by actually enjoying the fact you're starting to push this algorithm around, trying to confuse it.
Yep.
All right.
So again, just to summarise and being slightly cheesy, but awareness introduces friction, slows things down, and helps you restore your choice. Perfect.
And of course, what we're trying to do with this podcast, Sean, is get degree of control and therefore choice about what we choose to see and how we choose to see it. All right. Goodness me, time is whistling away from us. Let's wrap up. If we recognise that the modern information systems we're all engaged with and will always be engaged with are not optimised for calm reflection, then we have to accept that it is optimised for engagement, and that is probably driven by outrage.
Indeed, and that outrage is, as we've already mentioned, one of the most reliable ways to keep people emotionally engaged.
And the more engagement, the more revenue. But once you've recognised that mechanism, the system begins to lose some of its power. You get to decide whether that language it's used, that particular post that you just looked at, is one that you want to follow.
Indeed.
So before we go, ask yourself this. How much of what frustrates you or angers you online actually entered your life naturally? Or how much of it was deliberately amplified because somebody profits when you react? And with that thought, we look forward to getting your questions and comments. We look forward to the next episode. And as we now move through what's going to be, I guess, about the next sixth or seventh episode, we're going to start swinging around now from the mechanics of the information system towards how these mechanics are being applied. And then we'll move from there into some of the case studies, but that's coming later. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Until the next time. Thanks, Sean.
Goodbye.
That's it for today's episode of Fact and Friction. Thank you for listening. If you found this useful, follow the podcast for more or go to our website, lumini.org.
We really would welcome any questions and feedback you might have. And if you'd like to go deeper, you'll find links to the research and the show notes in the episode description.
And as always, stay curious, question the noise, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.